So now we're going to do another variation. We're going to use our darts to create to create gathers. There's no actual sewn darts, but we still have the same fit on the body that the darts have created. We're just turning them into more of a design feature than anything. So we're going to put our front darts off the fitted bodice block into the shoulder, into a yoke, and then our back waist dart goes into this fullness as well, with some additional gathering put in there because it's that waist dart's not very big, so it certainly doesn't create this amount of gather when you move it around up into this top section here. So the first thing we have to do is our yoke. For our front yoke, I've decided that it's going to be, I'll rub that out because that's confusing, that it's going to be 3 centimetres from the shoulder seam down, which is in half scale, so 6 centimetres full scale. So we just need to trace out that section there and across at the shoulder. So there's our front yoke. And then what we do is get our back yoke here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, because we can't just sit that there because these ends don't match, so we have to get rid of the dart. So if we match the necklines up, if we match the shoulder up at the neckline here, we can, and we've got this line here, the back of the yoke just goes through the bottom of the dart, and that's quite a nice, it works because visually it's a nice depth for a yoke, and it's also convenient because we can get rid of the shoulder dart into that panel line as well, or into that yoke line. So we marked a little notch there. Then we need to go over to the end of our dart, and you can see here, put a little mark there. We pivot from the bottom of our dart, pivot the dart closed, and then we draw down from the shoulder to the bottom of our yoke. And because I've used a tailor's awl here, there's a little dot here that shows the end of the dart, so just there. So then when I draw in this line, it's going to angle up, and so that's where you can see that, that's actually where the centre back, that's where the dart has gone. So it starts off straight, but because we close this, obviously that little section's going to move up, and so the dart's going to go up here. So we just need to, for this yoke, is the centre back, which needs to be on the fold. But depending on your style, it could be that you have a zip down the back, so it won't be on the fold. You'll actually have to add a seam allowance for that zip. But in this instance, to match the little toile we've made, it is on the fold. And then we'd need to add seam allowances around here, so 6mm seam allowance for the neckline, none at the centre back, 1 centimetre at the yoke line, 1 centimetre for the armhole, 1 centimetre for our front yoke line. Okay, so that's our yoke we've created. Now what we're going to do is we're going to close these 2 darts, and we're going to, when we close them, we're going to open up the top here. So we're going to open up that fullness into the yoke line. So we've already got this top section here is already included in our yoke pattern. So we start at that line down, all the way down the centre front, and then across to our first dart. And really, I can't stress how important it is for you when you're first starting a pattern like this, not to just trace out the whole block, because then you've got darts there and you've got shapes that you don't need for the final garment, and it's just going to confuse you. So just outline, you can see it there, just outline the section that you need to begin with, and that's the section that's actually not moving, that's staying stable. So this first dart here we want to close. So we're going to pivot from the bust point. We've got our mark there, so we're going to pivot that around to close the dart there. And then we go around to our side seam dart, and we close that dart as well. So just make sure the dart arms match on the side seam. Now the armhole doesn't change at all, so we go around the curve up to where our yoke line is here, and put in your balance notch for your front armhole. Something I didn't do as I was going around here is add in some reference points. So along, I can actually see a line there that I rubbed out before, that's why I'm using that point there. But if we have that point there, that'll give us a reference point for drawing this top section here. And if we take it back to the beginning as well, our first place here, we can put that same mark in there, and you can see that the two marks that I put in were a little one there and a little one there, and we're going to use those as the reference points when we draw our line. Okay, so there's our line. So also both of these have closed, and that fullness has gone up into this yoke line here, just like on the sample. So no stitched darts here or here, but a nice amount of fullness into the yoke. And the reason we have this yoke too is because it's just, it's nicer, it's more flattering. You get a more structured look from the front of the garment. You get this nice, structured flat section here, and then the gathers coming out from there. It can be a bit odd if you just have the gathers going all the way up to the shoulder. And what can happen sometimes too, especially if you've got a sleeveless thing, is because this fullness is up higher, when somebody's wearing it, it can actually slip down and slip back, and the fullness can, go over the shoulder. So always bring your yoke lines forward.
It also helps to keep that looking quite straight. So even though that pattern piece that you've done down here is quite shaped and rounded on the pattern piece, it actually looks straight once it's sewn into the yoke.
Yeah, because we've got a straight line on our front yoke line here. Good point, Libby. So then for this pattern piece here, we just need to indicate that it's, for this sample anyway, for this style, centre front on the fold. Seam allowance, well, we'd have a 6mm seam allowance around the neckline, 1 centimetre along the gathered line there, 1 centimetre for the armhole, 1 centimetre for the side seam, and 1 centimetre for the waist, and of course no seam allowance added down the centre front because it's on the fold.
And we need to also straighten that side seam, I think, don't we? See how it
because when we
happens, it's only a tiny bit.
It's only a tiny bit, but it'll be double that in full scale. So good point, Libby. Okay, so now for the back, if we turn this around, again we've got no back dart going into the waist, and the shoulder dart has been incorporated into the yoke. So we've pivoted this dart around into this fullness here, into the yoke, but like I said before, there's not enough fullness in that little yoke because it's only like 1.5 centimetres. So if we turn this around and put it up here, it's not going to create that amount of gathering. So we need to add in additional gather or fullness to going into that yoke. So what I did here is I just traced off that bottom section. This is to show you the steps. So literally just traced around that, drew in the dart, and then what I've done next to get to this point here, you can see, maybe it's easier to see on the green, is I've used this piece here to create the piece underneath. So I've traced this around. Actually, I'll show you exactly what I've done here to get to this point here. So again, we trace out the section that's not moving, Okay, so from the dart arm here across to the centre back, up the centre back and along to a position that's sort of above the dart here, and then we can put a little mark. And that's just a reference point there. It doesn't, there's no particular measurement, but just, you know, have it up from the dart point. And so now we're going to pivot the dart out of here. So we're going to, just using the end of the dart here, we're going to swing that across until the dart arms match, and then we're going to put in the rest of our block here. So side seam and up to the up to that point that we created before, and just make sure you mark in your balance notches there. Okay, so that's the piece that we've got. So that dart now has disappeared. You can see that the waist stayed the same. So if we actually folded that out, that would be the waist length, which is there. So that stayed the same. Side seam, armhole, centre back, everything else has stayed the same. It's just at the top edge here. You can see, you know, it was this big. Now it's got that big because the dart's gone up into that space there. So the next stage, and this is slightly more complicated, but it's just that it's hard to pivot out a dart and add in fullness by pivoting at the same time. So that's why I've done it in 2 steps. So if we just flip this over here, so what we're going to do now, we decided that we wanted 50% extra fullness. So our original width across here was, say, 9 centimeters. So again, we want to add in 4.5 centimeters to make it 50% bigger than this here. We've already got 1 centimeter of that fullness for when we pivoted the dart. So that takes us back to 3.5. So into each of these points, and I've just marked a point sort of halfway between the centre back and where that dart was pivoted to, and the other one halfway between the armhole and that point as well, to give me 2 reference points at which to pivot. And then, so that means we've got 3.5 centimetres. So we could make it, you know, well, actually let's make it 4 centimetres. That extra bit of fullness, that's only an extra 1 centimetre of fullness on the full scale. To do that, we then need to, so the waist it stays the same because we want that fitted waist with the shaping. So we go around along the waist, up to our centre back and across to our first reference point here. And then, because we're going to add 2 centimetres now, and we just need to measure, actually maybe if I do, so you can see, if I do that, so I'm going to measure across 2 centimetres and put a little mark, okay? So that's the amount of fullness we want to add in at that point. So we go back down to the bottom, and then from this pivot point at the bottom, we swing it around until this matches up with our 2 centimetre. So it was there, mark 2 centimetres, swing it across from the waist here, adding in our 2 centimetres there. And then I draw this across, and we've already added 1 centimetre in there, so we're not going to add more in there. We're going to take it over to the side here. And then this reference point here matches with this reference point here. So we're going to draw that across to there, put a little mark, and then again mark in 2 centimetres. It just so happens that this is nearly 2 centimetres from this edge, but this mark here isn't necessarily related to this corner point here. And then from the bottom here, we're going to put our pencil right on the edge, and we're going to pivot this around until that swings out and matches this one here. And then we can draw in the rest of the yoke seam, the armhole, down the side seam, and to our reference point there. It's marking now.
Is this just giving us a better shape, because we are only adding fullness on one edge, not straight through to the waist. It's just up the top. So by splitting that 4 centimetres into 2 sections of 2, is it just giving it a better shape?
Yeah, exactly. So you get a smoother line here to create gathers to go into the yoke, and also a smoother line at the waist as well. Because if you do it all at one point, and I can just do this very roughly. So if we came across, we did it at, use this as a reference point, and then we added in, 4 centimetres all in one go, and pivoted that over to there. It wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, the angle's quite sharp.
Yeah, it's not too bad at the top, but at the bottom, like going onto the waist, like you've actually got a bit of a corner there. And you could soften that up a little bit. And even when you draw this here, like you could, soften that angle up a little bit. So it's not bad. But generally, if you're trying to add fullness, it's good to have the fullness evenly distributed across the section that you're putting it into. So this was, actually I won't show you that. So so now just join these together at the top here. And seam allowances, we've got our centre back on the fold again. And remember, like these seam allowances and things will depend on your style. If you've got a zip down the centre back, then you'd need to add a 1 centimetre seam allowance. But it's on the fold here, so we only need 1 centimetre seam allowance on the waist, the side seam, the armhole, and a 1 centimetre seam allowance up here as well, because that's going to sew onto our yoke piece, which has a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So, that's how we achieve this style.